Hello, everybody. Good morning. It's Tuesday at 10 a.m. So, your favorite hosts, Tim and Tim, we're back again for another exciting episode. At least we think it's exciting because we learned a lot last week in Mississippi and we wanted to talk about it. So, you know how this goes. We talk about things that we're learning every day. We talk about things that we're messing up. We provide full transparency and honesty in order to try to help you guys learn from our mistakes and learn from our experiences in order to help your multifamily real estate investing journey a little bit easier. But with that said, Tim Vest, how you doing today, man? Good morning.
Can't complain. Glad to be back somewhere where it's a little bit cooler at the moment. It was hot
Yeah,
this week.
95 degrees and 100% humidity was a little rough last week, but I'll tell you, 356 doors knocked and said maintenance, and
Yeah.
I think I got that burned into my head now.
Yeah, I still was struggling with management or maintenance, right? Like
All the above works.
man of maintenance,
Man of maintenance.
yeah, I guess.
Start
Um
calling you mom.
yeah, it was fun though. It was long days, but it was fun.
Yeah, yeah, I do enjoy
Especially
it.
especially when every now and then when you're doing those, you run across like that tenant that just kind of makes it fun. Obviously, obvi- obviously you run across a few tenants where you're like, but you know, you run across that one every now and then that's like, come on in, and she wants
Oh
to
yeah.
chat with you forever, and there's no complaints, and it's kind of it's interesting.
My favorite thing about doing those unit walks is people are very skeptical of you coming in when you say inspection. But we're like,
Yeah,
you have to reassure them and be like, hey, no, I'm here because I'm trying to fix things. Please let me help you. And they're like, I don't have any issues. I'm like, and I start rattling off, do you have any water leaks? Are your appliances working? Is the toilet flushing? And then it just starts to snowball. And it's, oh, now that you're here. Oh, I forgot about this. Oh, I forgot about that. And then you always ask, are you submitting work orders for these things? No, management hasn't been doing work orders, so I just stopped doing it because it wasn't being done. So that's a lot. You hear that a lot, but there's also a bit of they just don't submit work orders, right? And
yeah.
my favorite thing is always when they say they have no issues, and then you look underneath the sink and there's an active water leak. I'm like, you got a bucket under here for a reason, and they're like, oh yeah, but it's no big deal. It doesn't leak that much.
Yeah. My favorite was I was doing due diligence on a property near where I live, and you look under the sink, and they have disconnected the pipes altogether, and it's draining literally straight from the sink into a bucket. It's not a leak. The pipes are no longer there,
Oh,
and it was just going into a bucket,
they've been
and
watching too much Yellowstone.
yeah, and you could see out the back door where they had been, once a day, once every other day, just dumping this bucket out in the backyard.
Oh man, and the other thing that was interesting, not capex related, but when you start, people know that you're on site doing inspections and maintenance inspections, because we're with the new management company. That's all. Um, they're just like, well, so and so keeps throwing their trash off the back balcony. I'm like, well, you reported it to the front office, and they're like, no. I was like, you do know if they get 3 violations, they can be evicted, and they're like, oh, and their eyes
Yeah.
light up, and it's like, oh, finally, we got some. What was what one of the on-site ladies had a great name for like the local PD, of the the apartment complex, the tattletale of the apartment complex. What do they call that person? Do you remember?
I don't know
You
that
know
I
what I'm
heard
talking
that.
about, though, right?
Yeah,
Ah,
I don't know that I heard that,
oh, I
but
think it
yeah,
was Loretta saying it. She was just like, "Oh, you get like a tattle. You call it a tattletale. You get a tattletale in every apartment complex, but we welcome tattletales because
yeah,
usually they tattletale on the people that you don't want living at your place, anyways."
right. Yeah,
So,
the I you mentioned something though. I do always like that. Are you the owner? Question, and
oh
I
no, 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 no.
even when I am, I'm like, nope, no.
you know, it's so funny. It did take a while for the on-site managers to realize that if the tenant asked, I'm part of the maintenance crew and the leasing officer is my boss, or the property manager, whoever's the head property manager of that.
Yeah.
That's my boss right there. So make sure you say some kind things out loud.
Yeah, but and guys, before you get on to us, like I did one of the first properties I ever owned. I walked up, I was very proud, right? I'm very proud of the property. And I walked up, and the tenant's like, "Are you the owner?" And I'm like, "Yes, I am." Yes, I am. And and they were like, "Oh, well, I got some things to talk to you
I
about."
got a bone to pick with you.
And you know, and then on another property, somehow the one of the tenants got my number. And man, there's a reason, folks, that we pay for on-site property management. But I would get calls Sunday night, sitting at home, and which is cool, which is great. I mean, and don't get me wrong, I used to do a lot of that before, when I had a smaller portfolio and stuff. But when you're managing, when you own over 1,000 units, that's just not feasible, right? That if 1,000 tenants had our numbers, that would not be beneficial to the tenants, I promise you.
Oh, no, absolutely not.
So yeah, but I did recently, and here's another thing. It's not all complaints, right? And I'll call this one out. On Centennial Lofts recently, I'm gonna give Tim and I a little bit of a a little celebration here, toot our horn a little bit. That's what that was, toot our horn a little bit. And I don't know why
that's
that means.
Not pulling my chain.
Yeah, yanking your chain. I don't know. I think that's tooting a horn, right?
Yeah.
I was checking on our property, on the renovations on our property in Raleigh, and I was down in the laundry room. Our on-site and our regional was with me, so shout out to Crystal and Margaret here. And there was a tenant in there, and he saw me do something. He saw me pick something up and put it in the trash, and it dawned on him, and he goes, "You the owner?" And I'm like, And he had seen Crystal and Margaret talking to me. And I'm like, yeah, there's no denying it at this point. And he goes, "You the owner?" Because only owners pick stuff up and put it in the trash like that. And I was like, all right, you got me. And he goes, "Man, this property is so much better than it was a year ago." And he was just like, "You guys are doing a great job." He's like, "I've lived here." Yeah. Tim Vincible. What's up, Will? But Will's been helping us come up with names for you and me, and I think I do like Tim Vincible, Will. So anyway, he was just really complimentary. So every now and then it makes you feel good, right? And he did point to Margaret too, and he pointed to Margaret. And guys, so we recently put our own property management on this property. He pointed to Margaret, and he goes, "Huge change since she came on board." He was like, "She's been awesome." And Margaret got to hear that, right? Margaret got to hear that. And as an owner, and as Tim and I hired Margaret, we felt phenomenal about that, right? And I think I told you the next day, I was like, "Man, I need to tell you this," right?
Oh, yeah. You were like, we've been getting pooped on quite a bit lately from all the things that are out of our control, but here's a win. So let's celebrate a little bit of a win, because we know we're doing the right thing, but you don't always hear it. So it's always nice to hear that you're doing the right thing.
But hey, so we've been tooting our horns here, and I think we got a little off track. And since Will showed up today, I think we should probably talk about what we said we were going to talk about, right?
Oh, yes. Okay, so all right, I just like talking. I think it's fun. That's the whole point of this, right? I mean, we have an agenda of things that we want to talk about, but like ultimately, we just want to show people what it's like to own and operate deals, like things that you and I talk about on a day-to-day basis, the things that we're learning, experiencing, messing up on, et cetera, and so forth, right? Like it's all valuable information, right? It's transparency at the end of the day. And so the whole point of this show was to talk about the difference between CapEx and renovation. I mean, CapEx and deferred maintenance, because sometimes there seems to be a hard line in the sand of what goes above the line and goes below the line. And there can be some differences in how you like to look at what you consider CapEx versus what you consider deferred maintenance. So we're just going to talk about our experience and how we look at it and what we do in order to combat both of those. Now, you might talk about it differently. You might not agree with me. You might disagree with it, whatever. Truthfully, that's okay. Everybody does their things a little bit different. So we're just going to talk about it on a high level basis. So some of the things that we noticed when we were doing the inspections on the Mississippi portfolio was the deferred maintenance. And I would consider the deferred maintenance touch-up paint and replacing faucets and replacing doors, replacing some toilets, replacing carpets on a turn. Like if you have a tenant move out and a new tenant move in, like some of these carpets were original from 2008 and it showed. So when we're doing these types of due diligence on these properties, we're going in to buying these places with our initial rehab budget. And we do all of these individual unit walkthroughs because we're taking notes around what needs to be replaced. Now, the order of which we replace those things obviously comes down to the access to the unit, right? If we don't have access to the unit, it's kind of hard to replace flooring. But there are some units where you literally look at this place and you're like, okay, you're going to have to move your stuff to one half of the building, one half of the house, and then we'll replace the carpets and move it to the other half of the house because these are just in terrible, terrible condition. And when we're doing all these unit walkthroughs, we're taking notes around paint, flooring, appliances, that kind of stuff. And I would consider anything to be CapEx is if we're budgeting to replace these items going in. So we're budgeting to replace the roofs. We're budgeting to replace the HVACs. We're budgeting to put in flooring in every single unit. We're budgeting to repaint, a color repaint, a color change repaint versus just like a touch up in every single one of the units. We're either resurfacing or replacing the countertops. All of that is very, very important to identify so that you can communicate effectively with your lender of what your rehab budget's going to be versus what you plan on replacing through normal operations of the business, right? Through normal repairs, maintenance, and turns in your P&L. And you can argue with me because there's no right way to do it. I've seen people budget everything up front. I've also seen other people take CapEx funds from operations, right? Instead of doing your normal like $250 per unit per year. Some people are just like, all right, well, this year I'm going to put $100,000 in CapEx, and next year I'm going to put $200,000 in CapEx, and all of that is going to come from the cash flow of the property. So there's a bunch of different ways to do it, but we typically like to look at these deals and say we're going to budget for all of this stuff up front because that's going to increase our cost basis. And to me, there's a lot of people that focus on your going in cap rate versus your operating cap rate versus your exit cap rate. And you could go down a whole rabbit hole with that. I know we have before, but to us, I feel like our most important metrics are what are our stabilized value and what's our all-in cost. If I know those two numbers, I know how much profit there is to be made. Now, where the money comes from is important. And that's why I like to look at it as all-in cost versus your operating cap rate, because you can compress your operating cap rate, meaning your cash flow is going to go down by taking money from repairs and maintenance in order to rehab your property and do the deferred maintenance that hasn't been done over the last 15, 20 years, right? Tim, do you think I'm missing anything there or anything you want to add?
No, I mean, and like you said, a lot of times it's just up to the operator, right? Like kind of how they want to, handle those things. But I always look at it from the standpoint of, what needs to be done now, right? That can save you money in the future is kind of what I look at a lot of things as. Like this portfolio is a really good example because it's right on that 15-year window, right? It's right at that 15-year mark. 10 to 15 years tends to be kind of a point when you need to, like, properties could start to use some injection of capital for things like deferred maintenance. And a lot of we go into a lot of properties that are, let's say we've seen an 80s product. We've walked into 80s products where they're 40 years old, 35 years old, and nobody's done anything since it was built, right? And they are way, way, way behind. Whereas, if somebody 10 years before had just put a little bit of money in, then they'd be a lot better off now. And that's kind of how this portfolio presented itself. Is it was like, hey, they're in really good shape. And if you do a little bit now, like what Tim's talking about, you budget for these things and you do a little bit now, you're really going to save yourself 3, 4, 5 years from now. Whereas you can continue to do the bare minimum, but that's probably going to end up costing you more in the long run.
Yeah, something else that just dawned on me is it's something that I like to think about when we're doing the operations of a property is when you're underwriting these deals and you're putting in your repairs and maintenance percentage, and some people will use anywhere from 3 to 15% repairs and maintenance yearly, right? And it depends on the age of the asset, depends on where the money's coming from, depends on a whole lot of things. But my personal opinion is that if you're budgeting 10%, right, of your net income that's going to go towards repairs and maintenance, and you only spend 8% in the year, you should actively look at deploying that extra 2%. And if you don't actively deploy it, keep it into the reserves so that you can inject it into the property. Why is that important, Tim? Well, because when you go to sell this property, which is inevitably going to happen, it's going to show a whole lot better. It's going to be cleaner. It's going to be in better condition. It's going to have better curb appeal. All of the things that a potential buyer is going to look at, though, they're going to judge you as an operator of how well did you take care of this place. And
Yeah.
if you budget 10% and you only spend 3, well, you're doing the bare minimum. So at what point in time are you going to take care of your property so the property takes care of you? And it shows, like, when you go to sell a property, the new owners or the new buyers aren't going to have to budget as much money in capex because you've been doing it consistently along the way. So you might actually get a higher purchase price than what you thought because their rehab budget coming in is going to be a little less.
Yeah, and I like that approach as well, guys, because I've been in properties before where we were under budgeted, and something came up, and it's like, how are we going to pay for that, right? And I hate that conversation. I hate the how are we going to pay for that conversation. I would rather have the money there. I would just rather have it there and say it's there. We got it covered. And then, like Vitali's talking about, you can choose to do some things over time to make the property stay better. And then at the end of the day, when you go to sell it, if that money's sitting in reserves, it can get returned at that point in time. You can take it
Yeah.
at that point in time. But I've, again, guys, like I have definitely been there where, it's like we're cash flowing, but we don't have any money in reserves, and an HVAC goes out or 3 HVACs goes out, and it's like, man, where are we coming up with this $10,000 right now?
Hmm.
Um, and that's a horrible feeling to have, an absolute horrible feeling. So, I like the conservative approach and keeping those cash reserves high.
Yeah, absolutely. So, it all depends. How well are you going to take care of your property? What's your outlook of how long you're going to keep the property matters too. One of the things in our coaching group that I challenge people on all the time is, they're buying even a 2000s product, and I say, okay, well, how old is everything? And you kind of know that's probably original. And I said, okay, well, how long? So you got 100 units there, you got 100 HVACs. Let's assume maybe 20% of them have been replaced over the last 15, 20 years just because they've gone bad. And you plan on holding this for 10 years. Do you think those HVACs and those water heaters are going to last another 10 years? No. So where does the money come from when they start to go bad and you need to replace them? Oh, I didn't think about that. Right. So if your viewpoint is 5, 7, 10 years, you need to think about what is going to go wrong over that time period versus what's going to go wrong in the first 12 to 24 months. But if you're looking to just get in and get out, then your business plan is going to be a little different. Maybe you're going to budget to replace 20% of them during your time period, but then know that your buyer is going to identify that in their due diligence walks that they're going to have to replace those items as well. So don't be caught off guard and surprised of, oh, well, I replaced some of the HVACs. Like, they might have a longer viewpoint than you do, so they're going to have to replace those things in that time period as well.
Yeah, and treat them well, right? Like, plan to replace them, but then when you go in, put those things on a service contract.
Yeah.
Um, have the HVAC guy out there like once a quarter, right? Like, just rotating around your property, servicing those things and keeping them lubed up and keeping them charged. And you'd be surprised how much more time you can get out of them by doing that.
Yeah.
Because
Here. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I
Finish.
was just gonna say, because there's a fine line between like ongoing monthly expenses that you should look to cut, and ongoing monthly expenses that can save you even more money over time, right? And we go in and we look at like, what are things we can cut out, things like that. I wouldn't recommend cutting out. In fact, if they're not on the property when you buy it, I'd suggest putting it on the property when you buy it.
Yeah. So another thing that some of you guys are maybe aware of, maybe some of you aren't, but starting January 1st, all HVAC systems that were on the old Freon R410A, 410A, they are not going to be in production anymore. So it's been kind of like a soft landing where they have started making the new Freon air handlers and condensers. It's called R454B. So starting January 1, they will no longer produce 410A, Freon, or condensers or air handlers, right? So one of the things that Tim, actually one of the on-site managers had suggested, and we agreed with, was she was like, oh, we should go out and buy like 10 of these, what was it, 50-gallon or whatever the metric was. It was like 50 gallons of Freon or 50 pounds. It was pounds. She was like, we should go out and buy 10 of these 50-pound Freon containers because a lot of the HVACs are in good condition because they've been on a service contract, but you won't be able to get the Freon if they get low on Freon. So she was like, well, let's buy 10 of them. They're like $450 or $500 a pop. We'll leave them in the storage container, but spending that money is good investment in the future that you're not going to have to replace the unit maybe for another couple of years, right? So that could save you some money in repair in capex and replacements if you're doing a little bit upfront spending on repairs and maintenance. So what we had said was, okay, we're going to close on this thing like late November, early December. We're going to send an HVAC guy out there. They're going to service every single one of the units, check them all for Freon, and then leave us 10 of those 50-pound barrels of Freon so that we have them in the future, because doing the repairs now and spending a little bit of money now will make us a lot more money in the long run, because we're not going to have work orders of people's ACs going out and having to spend the money to replace them if they're still good working condition. So you're going to be your back's going to be put up against a wall here because you're not going to have access to it anymore. So, they started doing it, I think, at the beginning of this year, or maybe it was last year. I don't know, whatever. But starting January 1, they will not produce them. So if you have a condenser go out in the future, you will have to replace the outside condenser and the air handler, which it's going to be a couple $1,000s versus maybe a couple $100 to have it serviced.
Yeah, I think there's a conversion kit, but when we looked at the conversion kits, the price for the conversion versus just a replacement, it's almost negligible.
Yeah, the conversion kit, I'm going to throw up an arbitrary number, but I think the conversion kit was, $500, and to replace the air handler was another $500 or $600 or $700 on top of that. And we were just both like, for an extra $700, you're going to get a completely brand new unit that's going to last another 15 to 20 years. You spend the extra $500 or $600 and get it done.
Yeah. So those are things we're looking at, and again, we had to do it across 300 plus units, and factoring all that in starts to become pretty comprehensive as well. And at the same time, we're taking into account hey, what about flooring? What about carpet? What about water heaters? Water heaters are always an enigma to me.
Me too, man. You see some from the mid 90s that are still working great.
It's like you walk in and you look at it and it's like, man, that thing looks amazing. It's clean. It doesn't have an ounce of rust on it, all that good stuff. But then you realize, oh wait, the water's all on the inside. I have no clue what the inside looks like.
Yeah.
Yeah. So all that shiny paint on the outside really doesn't mean all that much. But hey, here's another thing. Have those serviced every year. At my own home, I have mine flushed every year.
Do you really? I didn't know that was a thing.
Yeah, have it flushed every year and have it, it seems to help maintain it quite a bit longer. So, have those things serviced as well. You'll get more life out of them.
So I know we're talking about apartments, but you should have your house serviced. If you own your own house, have an HVAC guy come out, service your water heater and your HVAC system before the end of the year. That way, that if something goes wrong, even in your personal residence, you're not going to have to replace the air handler and the AC unit. Like, that just dawned on me. Maybe, Tim, make sure you jot that down.
Yeah. And so here's something else. Here's something we saw on the property. We kept seeing, no, these properties are in great shape, by the way. So this is a little bit of a one-off issue, not a one-off per unit, but we started seeing baseboards and trim that was swollen, right? It was swollen, like it had high moisture content in it. That's what wood does when it gets wet, right? It swells. We could not figure out what was going on. The water heaters are great, no signs of leaks or anything. And then we realized, wait a minute, that's where the dryer vent. Its dryer vent is venting through this wall. And we started to see it on more on a few units, and then you start to realize, wait a minute, when those things get clogged up, dryers vent not just lint and air, but moisture, right? That's what they're venting out, right? Is humidity essentially, and that humidity gets trapped in the wall if those dryer vents get clogged up, and that's what we were seeing. Um, we so another thing to put on regular maintenance is on a annual basis, man, have somebody come out and clean those dryer vents out, because depending on how they're vented, especially if they run through interior walls and they're snaked to get outside, they can get clogged up and start to pour moisture into the walls, which not only is that damaging to the sheetrock and the trim and stuff, could become a mold issue, which is an even bigger problem.
Hmm.
You can always cut some sheetrock out or replace some trim. That's easy. When you start having to do mold remediation, now you got a different problem.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that's important. That's why you do due diligence with somebody. So like, Tim and I, we were walking into separate units, but when I saw that on the floor, it's like, Tim, come look at this because I've never seen this before. I really don't know what's going on. And we were kind of brainstorming about it. And that's how we came up with the washer dryer, the dryer vents, and we looked at it. And then we checked a couple other units, and it seemed to be an issue across the board. So we had brought it up with the seller and like, hey man, you got to have all these dryer vents across the property need to be blown out. I don't know when the last time they were blown out. Not only is it causing that issue with mold and moisture and water and baseboards swelling up and drywall needing to be replaced, it's a fire hazard. I don't really want these buildings to burn down, especially not in this insurance market, you know?
yeah, and then walk the exteriors, make sure that all those dryer vents, right, have the proper guards on them.
Oh, the worst one because it was missing a garden had a bird's nest in it.
Yeah, those birds like that nice little warm spot, right?
Yeah,
I don't know why though. It's so damn hot down there.
I know.
Um,
Mississippi birds, they're like, oh, it's below 90. Let me get in the air vent.
but just things like that you don't think about that you should be checking out, and a little bit of we're talking about deferred maintenance that goes along with deferred maintenance, right? Like make sure those things are blown out, make sure that you're servicing those HVAC, servicing those dryer vents, the water heaters, everything. Put them on some sort of plan, and quite frankly, save yourself some headaches while you're going through the ownership period.
And that doesn't it's not just pertaining to systems like air like HVAC and water heaters and plumbing, making sure you get the plumbing lines jetted out and cleaned out because people they get dirty, they get stuff flushed down the toilets. Have those jetted out, every couple of years or something like that in order to help make sure that you don't have any water backup. But the other thing that you shouldn't skimp out on is your landscaping. Um, you can tell a property that needs work by its exterior. So if you're not doing touch-up paint on the trim, and if you're not taking care of the bushes, you're not putting down, either mulch or pine straw or whatever you like to do. Something like that is very important, not only because it helps, the tenants feel good about where they live, but it also makes your curb appeal a lot better. It drives your traffic to the property. I can't tell you how many times, what's one of the things that people always complained about on Bigger Pockets is, oh, I'm doing my own property management and I go over to the property and they never show. I'm like, yeah, they did show. They just drove by the place. They saw it was in shambles, quote unquote, in shambles. And they're like, oh, I'm not going to live here just because they drove down the street.
Yeah, yeah, and it's always one of my favorite pet peeves is when I show up on a property and the current owner he's replaced roofs, right? The brand new roofs. And then you look over and there's literally tree limbs like touching the roof. And I'm
Hmm.
like, you just put a nice brand new roof on here and you left that tree limb just hanging right, not just hanging over it, but touching the roof.
Yeah.
And and I'm always like, man, that's so short-sighted. And then of course, you show up and somebody's complaining about hey, we're getting water intrusion in the units, or we're getting water at and you look up and their gutters literally have plants growing in them.
Yeah.
Not just clogged with leaves, but literally plants growing out of them.
Oh, yeah.
Um,
Trees growing out of the gutters. They're like, that shouldn't be there.
yeah, so water intrusion, let's try the gutters first and then we'll go from there, right?
Yeah.
So
All right. Well, this was fun. You learn a lot every time you do due diligence on a new property. It's always fun. Do it with people that have experience. You pay contractors come out, do the inspections of your HVACs and scoping your lines and checking out your roofs and finding damage, because hey, the roofs on these places had been replaced, and they found some installation errors. So we brought it up with the seller, and he's like, "Oh, I'll have the guys go over there and fix it right away, no problem."
Yeah.
Right? But if we hadn't done that, we wouldn't have known. We could have had a bigger problem on our hands later because of an oversight. Really, it's not that,
Yeah.
it's common. It happens all the time. Like, we're still human at the end of the day. We're not perfect. We make mistakes. So does everybody. But the more and more you do these due diligence things, the better that you get, the more efficient that you get. You get more comfortable knowing what to look for, what questions to ask, and overall, it's a good time. I enjoy it. It's nice to get out from behind the computer and go walk these units and talk to tenants and things like that, because they're going to give you the real scoop of the property compared to any broker or seller, for that matter.
Yeah. And if you don't have a ton of experience doing it, your first couple, hire a GC for the day to come with you and walk them, and then shadow that person, man. Like, just hang out with them, listen, ask when you see something, ask them what's going on there, get their feedback, and you'll learn a ton. Next thing you know, you'll be, a pro at doing these unit walks yourself.
Yep. So,
Yeah.
all right, guys, that's all the time we got for today. So appreciate you joining. Hope you learned something. See you next time.
See you guys.